My late wife's purse was the only thing I had left of her. When I couldn't find it, my son yelled, "I sold it. I needed money for my cruise." I called the pawn shop hoping to buy it back, but the man on the line sounded terrified. "Sir, there was a false bottom in that purse and what we found inside." I froze, my world collapsing around me yet again. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from. I want to see how far my story has reached. I'm 64 years old and thought I knew what heartbreak felt like when I lost my wife Hilda 3 months ago. I was wrong. Real heartbreak is standing in your own living room, staring at the empty spot on the dresser where her burgundy leather purse used to sit and hearing your own son tell you he sold it for cruise money. The evening had settled into that quiet hour when the house feels too large, too empty. I'd been sitting in my recliner, the same one where I'd spent countless nights watching Hilda organize that purse before bed. Such a simple ritual. She'd pull out receipts, count her cash, check her lipstick. For 35 years, I watched her do this. After she died, I'd sometimes open the purse just to catch a hint of her perfume, that soft floral scent that meant home to me. Now even that small comfort was gone. Wesley stood before me in the same wrinkled shirt he'd worn yesterday, not even bothering to look up from his phone. At 32, my son had perfected the art of disappointing me, but this felt different. This felt like betrayal. "Dad," it was just sitting there collecting dust. His voice carried no remorse, just mild irritation at having to explain himself. Just sitting there, my voice came out rougher than I intended, my throat tight with emotion. "Wesley, that was your mother's purse, the one she carried every day for 15 years. He finally looked up from his screen, and what I saw in his eyes made my chest constrict. Not guilt, not remorse, irritation. Pure irritation, as if I was the unreasonable one. "Look, I needed the money, okay? The cruise leaves next week and Melissa expects me to pay for both of us. You know how women are." Wesley shrugged like he was discussing the weather, not the last tangible piece of his mother I had left. "Besides, what were you going to do with it? Stare at it forever." His words hit like a physical blow. I gripped the back of my recliner, the same chair where Hilda used to sit each night. In this very spot, she would empty that burgundy purse, arranging everything just so before bed. It was her way of putting the day to rest. Such a simple ritual, but it was hers. It was proof she had existed. Proof of all those ordinary moments that make up a life together. "I can't believe you did this." The words came out as barely a whisper, my disappointment too profound for volume. Wesley stood up, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought perhaps he'd finally show some remorse. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "Dad, come on. You're being dramatic. It's a purse. Mom's gone. She doesn't need it anymore." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "I got $300 for it at Jimmy's pawn shop on 5th Street. "That's probably more than you paid for it originally." $300. He had reduced Hilda's memory to $300 in a cruise with some woman I'd met exactly twice. I felt something crack inside me, something vital giving way. Wesley, that purse was all I had left of her that still smelled like her perfume. I stopped, my throat closing up. How could I explain to my own son what it felt like to lose the woman you'd loved for 35 years? How could I make him understand that sometimes objects become sacred when they're all you have left? Oh God, Dad, please don't start crying again. Wesley rolled his eyes, his patience visibly thinning. "Look, if it makes you feel better, maybe I can buy you something nice from the cruise. They have good jewelry in the Caribbean." I stared at him, really stared at him, and felt something break inside me that I didn't think could break anymore. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd stayed up waiting for when he missed curfew, the young man I'd helped through college. Where had I gone wrong? "Get out." The words came quietly but with absolute finality. What Wesley's expression shifted from irritation to surprise. "Get out of my house." My voice was steady now, cold. "Take your things and get out." Wesley's face registered genuine shock. "Dad, you're overreacting. It's just a stupid purse." "It wasn't stupid to me." The words exploded out of me, years of disappointment finding their voice. "Nothing about your mother was stupid. And the fact that you can't understand that, the fact that you think it's okay to take the one thing I treasured most and sell it for vacation money, tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, shame. But then he grabbed his jacket from the chair and headed for the door. Fine, I'm going to Melissa's anyway. Maybe when you calm down, you'll realize I was trying to help. That purse was just making you more depressed. He paused at the door, one final barb ready. And for the record, Mom would want me to be happy. She'd understand why I needed the money. The door slammed shut, and I was alone with the silence and the empty space where Hilda's purse used to be. I walked over to the dresser and ran my fingers over the spot where it had sat. There was a faint outline in the dust, a perfect rectangle that proved it had been there, that I hadn't imagined it. Hilda always kept it right there next to her jewelry box and the framed photo of our wedding day. I picked up the wedding photo, studying her young face. She'd been 25 then, so full of hope and dreams. What would she think of Wesley now? What would she think of me for raising a son who could be so callous, so cruel? The house felt enormous and empty around me. Every room held memories of Hilda, but now even those felt tainted by Wesley's words. Just sitting there collecting dust, as if love was something that expired, as if grief had a deadline. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in my recliner, staring at the empty spot on the dresser. Tomorrow I would go to Jimmy's pawn shop. I'd offer $400 and $500, whatever it took to get Hilda's purse back. I still had some savings money we'd put aside for retirement trips we'd never get to take. But tonight, I just sat in the growing darkness, wondering how the son I'd raised could look at his grieving father and see nothing but an obstacle to his happiness. Wondering if Hilda would be as disappointed in Wesley as I was. Wondering if I'd failed them both. The worst part wasn't even losing the purse. The worst part was realizing that my son, the last family I had left, didn't understand what love looked like. And maybe, just maybe, he never would. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Wesley's face when he shrugged and called his mother's purse, just sitting there collecting dust. By 6 in the morning, I was dressed and waiting for Jimmy's pawn shop to open, $500 cash in my pocket and determination in my chest. The morning air was cool against my face as I drove through the quiet streets. Memories of Hilda filled the car, her laugh when I took a wrong turn, her hand resting gently on my arm as she pointed out interesting storefronts. 35 years of marriage meant that even the simplest tasks carried echoes of her presence. The pawn shop sat on a rundown stretch of 5th Street, squeezed between a laundromat and a check-cashing place. I'd driven past it 1,000 times, but never imagined I'd be walking through that door, especially not to buy back my dead wife's belongings from my own son. A bell chimed as I pushed open the glass door. The smell hit me immediately, a mixture of old leather dust and something chemical I couldn't identify. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with jewelry, watches, and electronic gadgets that other desperate people had traded for quick cash. "Help you with something," the voice came from behind the counter. The man was maybe 50, with graying hair and tired eyes that had probably seen every kind of human desperation imaginable. "My son sold you a burgundy leather purse yesterday." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'd like to buy it back." His expression changed immediately. He glanced toward the back room, then back at me, and I caught something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. Nervousness, maybe even fear. "You said a burgundy purse yesterday?" He was stalling, his fingers drumming against the counter. "Yes, about this big." I gestured with my hands. "My late wife's purse. My son sold it to you for $300. The pawnbroker, Jimmy, I presume, nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember. Look, sir, when we get items in, we have to check them thoroughly. Make sure there's nothing unexpected inside. You understand?" I nodded, not entirely following, but willing him to continue. "Well, when I was examining the purse, I noticed the weight was off. I've been in this business 25 years, and you get a sense for these things." Jimmy leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I found a false bottom in the purse. Hidden compartment, very clever design. And inside," he paused, studying my face. "Sir, there were letters inside, photographs too, personal items. As soon as I realized what they were, I put everything back exactly as I found it. I wouldn't normally say anything, but then you showed up and..." My heart began to race. "Letters. What kind of letters?" Jimmy looked uncomfortable now. "I think maybe you should see for yourself. Wait here." He disappeared into the back room and returned a moment later carrying Hilda's burgundy leather purse, the same one she'd carried every day for 15 years. The same one I'd watched her organize each night before bed. He placed it gently on the counter between us. I didn't look inside. Not yet. Sir, I'll give you the $300 back and another 100 on top of it. I don't want any trouble. Jimmy's voice had an edge of anxiety. I pulled the $500 bills from my pocket and placed them on the counter. Keep the 500. Just tell me what you saw. Jimmy hesitated, glancing around the empty shop. Look, sir, it's not my place to get involved in people's personal business. But these letters, they're between your wife and someone named David. They're intimate. And there are photos of them together, spanning many years by the looks of it. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Intimate letters, photos. My Hilda. Jimmy pushed the purse across the counter toward me. Take it. Consider it a straight exchange for your 500. No receipt necessary. My hands trembled as I took the familiar burgundy leather, now heavy with unexpected secrets. I needed to be alone when I looked inside. Needed privacy for whatever revelations awaited me. Thank you. My voice sounded distant even to my own ears. As I turned to leave, Jimmy called after me. Sir, I'm sorry. I truly am. I nodded, unable to form words, and stepped back out into the morning sunlight that suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. The world looked exactly the same as when I'd entered the shop 5 minutes ago, but everything had changed. I couldn't face going home, not yet, not with what might be waiting for me inside this purse. I drove to Riverside Park, where Hilda and I used to walk on Sunday afternoons. Found a bench overlooking the water, far from the scattered morning joggers and dog walkers. Only then did I allow myself to open the purse. The scent of her perfume hit me first, bringing a lump to my throat. I ran my fingers along the familiar leather interior, searching for the false bottom Jimmy had mentioned. After a moment, I felt a slight ridge that shouldn't have been there. I pressed gently, and a panel gave way, revealing a hidden compartment I'd never known existed in all the years Hilda had carried this purse. Inside lay a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, a small velvet pouch in an envelope of photographs. My hands shook as I untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated 27 years ago, just 8 years into our marriage, when Wesley was only 5 years old. My dearest David, it began, being apart from you these past weeks has been unbearable. The words blurred before my eyes. I forced myself to keep reading each line, driving the knife deeper. Hilda, my Hilda, writing of passion and longing for another man, making plans for secret meetings, expressing a depth of emotion I'd thought was reserved only for me. I set the letter aside and opened the envelope of photographs. The first showed Hilda, younger than I remembered her, now smiling brilliantly at the camera. Beside her stood a tall, distinguished-looking man with his arm around her waist. They were standing in front of a cabin I didn't recognize, looking for all the world like a happy couple. There were dozens more. Hilda and this David at restaurants on what appeared to be vacations at what looked like Wesley's high school graduation. I hadn't attended because I was overseeing a major construction project, the kind of absence that had been too common in our marriage. In the photo, David stood where I should have been, beaming proudly next to my wife and son. The velvet pouch contained a silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny cabin that matched the one in the photographs. Engraved on the back were the words, "Our sanctuary, always D." I sat on that park bench for hours, reading letter after letter, piecing together the story of my wife's other life. The life she'd shared with a man named David for over 20 years, right under my nose. The words in one letter made my blood run cold. Sometimes when I look at Wesley, I see your smile. He's growing more like you every day, my love. My son, my Wesley. Except what if he wasn't mine at all? I looked out over the water, trying to make sense of this new reality. Had our entire marriage been a lie? Had Hilda been living a double life all these years while I worked long hours to provide for our family? How could I not have known? How could I have been so blind? The worst part was that I couldn't even confront her. Couldn't demand explanations or express my hurt and anger. Hilda was gone, taking her secrets with her, or so she thought. One of the more recent letters, dated just 2 years ago, included an address. David's address, I presumed. In that moment, I made a decision. I would find this man, this David who had shared my wife's heart and possibly given her a child she passed off as mine. I needed answers, and he was the only one who could provide them. I gathered the letters and photographs, returning them to their hiding place in the purse. As I drove home, my mind raced through 35 years of marriage, re-examining every memory, every unexplained absence, every time Hilda had seemed distant or preoccupied. How many of our precious moments together had been shadows of her time with him? The house felt different when I returned, less like a sanctuary of memories, and more like a stage set where I'd played the role of devoted husband without realizing there were other actors in the wings. I sat in my recliner, Hilda's purse on my lap, and pulled out my phone. A quick internet search for the address from the letters brought up a property listing. An upscale home in the suburbs about 30 minutes away. The kind of neighborhood where successful professionals live comfortable lives. I dug deeper, searching for information about the homeowner. David Blake, retired architect, widowed. The pieces were starting to fit together. His wife had died about 15 years ago, according to an obituary I found. Around the same time, I remembered Hilda becoming particularly attentive to me, almost guilty in her affections. Had she been compensating? Trying to recommit to our marriage after David became available full-time, I stared at the screen at the stranger who had known my wife in ways I apparently never had. Distinguished, silver-haired, with the confident smile of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He looked like the type who would have time for school plays and family dinners, all the things I'd often missed while building my construction business. My phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. "We need to talk. I know you're upset about the purse, but there's something you should know. Something Mom told me before she died." I stared at the message, a cold certainty settling over me. Wesley knew. He knew about David, knew about the affair. Maybe he even knew that David might be his biological father. Was that why he'd sold the purse? Not just for cruise money, but to force this secret into the open. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I put the phone down and returned to the purse, methodically reading every letter, examining every photograph. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal before confronting either my son or my wife's lover. The letters revealed a relationship that had begun when I was working 16-hour days getting my construction company off the ground. Hilda had met David at an art gallery. She'd always loved art, another passion I'd had little time for. What started as friendship became more when David's wife was diagnosed with cancer. Hilda had comforted him through his wife's long illness, and somewhere along the way, comfort had turned to love. "You give me what Tyson never has," Hilda had written. "Time, attention, a listening ear. He builds houses for other families while our home feels empty even when he's in it." The words stung with their truth. I had been absent in many ways, believing that providing financial security was enough, that working to give Hilda and Wesley a good life justified missing dinners, school events, anniversaries. Now I realized what that absence had cost me. There was one letter that stood out from the rest, dated around the time Wesley would have been conceived. In it, Hilda expressed fear and confusion about her pregnancy, unsure of who the father might be. "I can't bear to tell Tyson my doubts," she'd written. "He's so excited about becoming a father. What if the baby isn't his? What if the timing reveals everything?" My head pounded as I read these words. Wesley, the son, I'd raised, the boy I'd taught to throw a baseball and drive a car, might not be mine at all. And based on his text message, he seemed to know it. I sat with this devastating possibility as night fell around me, the house growing dark. I didn't bother turning on lights. The darkness suited my mood, the blackness a reflection of the void opening up inside me. Everything I'd believed about my life, my marriage, my family, it was all cast into doubt by these letters. Even my grief felt confused now. Was I mourning the woman I'd loved, or a stranger who had lived a secret life with another man? Morning found me still in the recliner. Hilda's letters scattered around me like fallen leaves. I hadn't slept, but I'd made a decision. I would go to David Blake's house today. I would look this man in the eye and demand the truth about his relationship with my wife and his possible connection to my son. Wesley had texted twice more during the night. "Dad, please respond." And later, more urgently, "Dad, I know about David. Mom told me everything before she died. We need to talk." I didn't answer. Whatever Wesley had to say, I wanted to hear David's version first. Needed to understand the man who had claimed so much of my wife's heart without my knowledge. I showered and dressed carefully as if preparing for an important business meeting. In a way, I was. This would be the most significant negotiation of my life, a negotiation for the truth. The drive to David's neighborhood felt surreal. I passed manicured lawns and elegant homes, wondering which one had been the setting for my wife's other life. When I pulled up in front of the address from the letters, I sat for a moment gathering my courage. It was a beautiful home, tasteful, not ostentatious. The kind of place an architect would design with clean lines and thoughtful details. A Japanese maple graced the front yard, its delicate red leaves shimmering in the morning light. Hilda had always wanted a Japanese maple. I'd promised to plant one someday when I had time. I walked to the front door, Hilda's purse in my hand like evidence in a trial. Before I could knock, the door opened, and I found myself face to face with the man from the photographs. In person, David Blake looked older, wearier, but still carried himself with that same confident posture. Tyson. His voice was resigned, as if he'd been expecting me. I suppose this day was inevitable. Please come in. The fact that he knew my name, recognized me without introduction, only confirmed what I already suspected. David Blake had known all about me while I'd known nothing about him. I stepped into a home that reflected its owner's sophisticated, elegant, filled with art and books. The kind of home where people had time to cultivate beauty and knowledge. On the mantelpiece, I spotted a photograph that stopped me cold. Hilda, David, and Wesley standing together on a beach somewhere, smiling like a perfect family. The sight of it nearly brought me to my knees. How many vacations had they taken together while I stayed behind to work? How many memories had they created that excluded me entirely? I've been expecting you since Hilda passed. David gestured toward a sitting area. Would you like some coffee or perhaps something stronger? Answers. That's all I want. I held up Hilda's purse. My son sold this to a pawn shop. The owner found your letters, 27 years worth of them. David sighed heavily, sinking into an armchair. That purse. She was always so careful with it. Said it was the perfect hiding place because you never looked inside. His eyes met mine, a mixture of defiance and regret in them. I told her to be more careful, or to tell you the truth, especially once she got sick. So it's true. All of it. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. David nodded slowly. Yes. Hilda and I were together for 27 years. Not continuously at first. There were times she tried to end it, to recommit to your marriage. But after Caroline, my wife, died, things changed. Hilda became my lifeline, and I hers in a different way. I tried to process this. 27 years. Nearly the entirety of my marriage. Is Wesley my son? The question came out abruptly. One uncertainty that tormented me most. David looked away, his fingers tapping nervously on the arm of his chair. Hilda always said he was, but there was a period, the timing was close. We wanted to believe he might be mine, especially after I lost Caroline and knew I'd never have children of my own. The room seemed to spin around me. The possibility that I had raised another man's child, that the son I loved might not be mine by blood, was almost more than I could bear. Wesley knows about you. My voice was flat, stating a fact rather than asking a question. David nodded again, his expression pained. Yes, he found out about 5 years ago, saw us together by accident. Hilda had to tell him something, so she let him believe I might be his biological father. He's been coming to me for advice, for financial help. I've tried to be there for him in ways you couldn't be because of your work. Each revelation was another blow. Not only had my wife carried on a decades-long affair, not only might my son be another man's child, but they had formed a family unit without me. Wesley had been going to this man, this stranger, for the fatherly guidance that should have come from me. Something inside me, some last reserve of strength, gave way. I sank onto the couch, still clutching Hilda's purse like a life preserver in a stormy sea. I gave her everything. Worked myself to exhaustion to make sure she and Wesley wanted for nothing. And all that time, the words caught in my throat. David leaned forward, his eyes surprisingly sympathetic. You gave her financial security, Tyson. A beautiful home. But you weren't there. You missed dinners, birthdays, school events. You were building a business, and that mattered to you more than being present. Hilda needed someone who would listen, who would see her. That's what I gave her. That's what she couldn't get from you. The truth of his words cut deep. I had believed providing for my family was enough, that the sacrifices I made in terms of time and presence were justified by the comfortable life I gave them. Now I understood how wrong I'd been. Does Wesley hate me? The question surprised even me as it left my lips, but suddenly it seemed the most important thing to know. David's expression softened. No, he's angry, confused, feels betrayed by both his parents. He's been acting out, making poor choices. That's why he sold Hilda's purse, partly for money, yes, but also to hurt you, to force a confrontation. As if summoned by our conversation, there was a sound at the front door, a key turning in a lock. And then Wesley's voice calling out, "David, are you home? I got your message." What? So he stopped short as he entered the room and saw me sitting there, his mother's purse in my hands, surrounded by the evidence of his mother's secret life. For a moment, we just stared at each other, father and son, with 27 years of lies between us. Wesley froze in the doorway, his expression cycling through shock, anger, and finally settling into a defensive mask I'd seen too many times before. His eyes darted from me to David, then to the burgundy purse in my hands. "Dad, what are you doing here?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the confidence he tried to project. I stood up slowly, holding the purse like an exhibit in a trial. "Found your mother's purse, and everything she kept hidden in it for 27 years. A flash of understanding crossed Wesley's face. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "So now you know." His tone was flat, almost relieved. "Now you know what Mom kept from you all these years." David rose from his chair, moving between us like a mediator in a negotiation gone wrong. "Wesley, your father found Hilda's letters. He knows about our relationship." Wesley gave a bitter laugh. "Relationship, is that what we're calling it? An affair that lasted almost my entire life." His eyes met mine, challenging. "Did you read all the letters, Dad? Did you see the ones where she wondered if you were even my father?" The question hung in the air, like smoke, suffocating and toxic. I gripped the purse tighter, the worn leather creaking under the pressure of my fingers. I read enough. The words came out measured, controlled, though inside I felt anything but. "What I don't understand is why you never told me. Why keep her secret after she was gone?" Wesley's face hardened. "Why should I have told you?" "So you could feel the same betrayal I felt when I found out." He moved further into the room past David, stopping just short of where I stood. "I discovered the truth 5 years ago. Came by David's house unexpectedly and found Mom here. They were having dinner looking like," he swallowed hard, "looking like the perfect couple. Looking happy in a way I never saw her with you." The accusation stung worse than any physical blow. I'd always thought Hilda was happy with me, with our life together. Sure, I worked long hours, but it was all for her and Wesley, all to give them the security and comfort they deserved. She told me everything that night. Wesley continued, his voice gaining strength. "How they met when you were too busy with your precious company to take her to an art exhibition. How David listened when you were too tired. How she stayed with you because of obligation, because of me, because you were a good provider." He sneered at the last word, making it sound like an insult. "But she loved him." He gestured toward David, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "She actually loved him." David cleared his throat, finally breaking his silence. "It wasn't that simple, Wesley. Your mother loved your father too in her own way. She was conflicted about our relationship until the very end." Wesley rounded on him, years of pent-up anger finding a new target. "Don't rewrite history now. You told me yourself she was going to leave him once I finished college. You two were making plans. The cabin, remember, your special place where no one could find you? The cabin from the photos. The charm on the bracelet. Our sanctuary." I pieced together more of the puzzle, each new revelation cutting deeper than the last. "Is that why you sold her purse?" I asked Wesley, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "To punish her? To punish me?" A flicker of shame crossed Wesley's face before disappearing behind anger again. "I needed the money. That part wasn't a lie. Melissa has expensive tastes, and I've got credit card debt you wouldn't believe." He shrugged, a gesture so reminiscent of his mother, it made my heart ache. "The fact that it would hurt you was just a bonus. You were never there, Dad. Never. David came to my games, my graduation. He helped me with college applications while you were busy building houses for strangers." Every word was a knife, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. I had missed so much of Wesley's life, always believing there would be time later when the business was established, when we were financially secure. I'd sacrifice presents for provision, never realizing what it was costing me. "You've been taking money from David. The question came out more accusation than inquiry. Wesley didn't flinch. He offered. Said he thought of me as a son. That he wanted to make up for the secrecy for coming between you and Mom. His voice turned bitter again. Besides, why shouldn't I take it? If he is my biological father, he's not. David interrupted, his voice unexpectedly firm. Wesley's head snapped toward him in surprise. I'm not your biological father, Wesley. Your mother and I talked about this many times over the years. The timing of your conception, it doesn't work. You are Tyson's son. I felt a rush of emotions too complex to name. Relief, certainly, but also confusion. Anger, a strange sense of victory tangled with loss. Wesley was my son, my flesh and blood, yet he'd turned to another man for the fatherly guidance I should have provided. Wesley looked stricken. But Mom said, you both implied. David sighed heavily, sinking back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 66 years. We allowed you to believe what you wanted to believe, Wesley. After you discovered us, you were so angry with your mother, with both of us. You seemed almost relieved when she suggested I might be your biological father. Like it justified your anger toward Tyson. And he looked at me apologetically. I wanted it to be true. After losing Carolyn, never having children of my own, the idea that you might be my son, even if only through Hilda's deception, I wanted to believe it. Wesley stood frozen, his worldview visibly crumbling around him. His eyes darted between David and me, looking for truth, for certainty, finding neither. So what, you've been playing happy families with someone else's son? Pretending I was yours. The betrayal in his voice was palpable, directed now at David instead of me. I never claimed to be your father, Wesley. David's voice was gentle but firm. I simply didn't correct your assumptions. It was wrong of me, and I'm sorry. Wesley turned to me, his expression a complex mixture of anger and confusion. And you believe him, just like that. He could be lying to protect Mom's reputation, to protect his own. I tightened my grip on Hilda's purse, feeling the weight of the secrets it contained. Why would he lie now? What would be the point? Wesley had no answer for that. He stood there, caught between the two father figures in his life, one by blood, one by choice, both of whom had failed him in different ways. David broke the uncomfortable silence. There's something else you should both know. His eyes met mine, then shifted to Wesley. Hilda wrote a letter before she died, a final letter explaining everything. She asked me to keep it until I thought the time was right. I believe that time has come. He stood and walked to a desk in the corner of the room, removing a sealed envelope from a drawer. The sight of Hilda's handwriting on the front, my name written in her familiar, sloping script, sent a jolt through me. Even now, 3 months after her death, seeing evidence of her existence was like a physical touch. David handed me the envelope. Hilda wrote this 2 days before she passed. She knew the truth would come out eventually and wanted to explain things in her own words. I stared at the envelope, not yet ready to open it, to hear Hilda's voice from beyond the grave, explaining why our marriage had been built on such profound deception. Wesley watched me, his earlier anger giving way to a wary curiosity. Did she tell you what's in that letter? He addressed David, who nodded slowly. Every word. She wrote it here at this table while I held her hand. She was so sick by then, but she insisted on getting it all down. It was important to her that you both understand everything. I traced my finger over Hilda's handwriting, feeling a new wave of grief wash over me. After 35 years of marriage, after raising a child together, building a life together, I was only now going to learn the truth about the woman I'd loved. Wesley moved closer, his hostility temporarily set aside in the face of this final communication from his mother. Are you going to open it? Not here. The words came out firmer than I intended. Not now. I needed privacy for this final conversation with my wife. Needed time to prepare myself for whatever truths or lies the letter contained. David nodded in understanding. Of course, take it home. Read it when you're ready. But Tyson, his eyes held mine, surprisingly compassionate given the circumstances. Be prepared for difficult truths. Hilda was honest in that letter, more honest than she ever was in life. Wesley made a small sound, drawing our attention. When you've read it, will you let me know what it says? Despite his earlier bravado in that moment, he looked like the little boy I remembered, the one who would climb into my lap after I came home from work, eager to show me his drawings or tell me about his day. I'll call you. The promise felt significant, a small bridge across the chasm that had opened between us. The tension in the room shifted, not dissipating entirely, but transforming into something more contemplative, less raw. The three of us stood in a triangle of complicated connections bound together by the woman whose absence we were all feeling in different ways. David broke the silence once more. Wesley, I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have let you believe I might be your father. Shouldn't have encouraged that thinking. It was selfish of me. Wesley's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly, accepting the apology without fully forgiving the deception. I turned to David, the question that had been burning inside me, finally finding voice. Why? Why did she stay with me if she loved you? Why the deception, the double life? Why not just leave? David's eyes clouded with memories? It wasn't that simple. She did love you, Tyson. Differently than she loved me, perhaps, but genuinely. And she valued the life you built together, the security, the respectability. His gaze shifted to Wesley. And more than anything, she didn't want to hurt Wesley, to disrupt his life with a divorce with scandal. Wesley scoffed at this, so instead she lived a lie. Made us all live a lie. How is that better? David had no answer for that, and neither did I. The three of us stood in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, our own recalibration of the past based on these new revelations. I need to go. I clutched Hilda's purse in one hand, her final letter in the other. I need time to process all this. David nodded, understanding in his eyes. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. His gaze shifted to include Wesley. Either of you can come back when you're ready to talk more. Wesley looked at him, then at me, confusion and hurt still evident in his expression. I need time too. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. Dad, He faltered, seemingly unable to find the right words. I'll be at Melissa's if you want to talk after you've read the letter. I nodded, grateful for this small olive branch after the harsh words we'd exchanged. Then Wesley was gone, the door closing softly behind him. I turned back to David, studying the man who had shared my wife's heart for nearly 3 decades. In another life, we might have been friends. He seemed thoughtful, cultured, attentive, all the things I had failed to be in my single-minded focus on providing financial stability. You gave her what I couldn't. The admission cost me, but it was true. You were there when I was absent. David's expression softened. And you gave her what I couldn't: security, stability, a beautiful home, a son. Hilda used to say we each filled different needs in her life, that she couldn't imagine choosing between us. But she did choose. She chose to marry me, to stay with me, while keeping you on the side. The bitterness crept back into my voice despite my efforts to contain it. David shook his head gently. She chose both of us in different ways. Right or wrong, that was her choice. He gestured to the letter in my hand. She explains it better than I can. Read it, Tyson, then decide what you want to do next. I left David's house with more questions than answers, Hilda's purse and her final letter heavy in my hands. The drive home passed in a blur, my mind replaying the confrontation, trying to process the magnitude of the deceptions that had shaped my family life. The house felt different when I returned, emptier somehow, as if Hilda's absence had deepened, now that I knew how much of her had never truly been present. I sat in my recliner, placing her purse on the side table and staring at the sealed envelope in my hands. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately, to finally hear Hilda's explanation for the double life she'd led. Another part wanted to burn it unread, to protect myself from whatever painful truths it might contain. In the end, I set it aside. I wasn't ready yet. Needed time to steady myself before this final conversation with my wife. Instead, I reached for Hilda's purse again, methodically removing the contents of the hidden compartment. The letters, the photographs, the silver bracelet with its cabin charm. I spread them on the coffee table, a visual timeline of betrayal spanning nearly 3 decades. One photograph caught my eye, Hilda and David sitting on the porch of what must be the cabin from the bracelet charm. Their posture was intimate, comfortable, Hilda leaning into him in a way she rarely did with me in our later years. They looked happy in a way that made my chest ache with recognition. When was the last time Hilda had looked at me like that? Had she ever? I picked up one of the letters dated about 15 years ago, shortly after David's wife had died. Hilda's handwriting was more hurried than usual, the words spilling across the page with emotional urgency. My darling David, she'd written. Now that Caroline is gone, we need to discuss our future. I know you want me to leave Tyson to finally make our relationship official. Part of me wants that too, wants to wake up beside you every morning to stop living this divided life. But it's complicated. Wesley is in high school now at such a crucial age. And Tyson, he's a good man, David, a good provider. He doesn't deserve the pain and humiliation divorce would bring, especially with you as the reason. Can we wait just a little longer? Until Wesley is settled in college, until the timing is better. I set the letter down, a new understanding dawning. Hilda had considered leaving me, had actively discussed it with David. The only thing that had stopped her was concern for Wesley and, ironically, some misplaced desire to protect my feelings. Another letter dated about 7 years ago revealed more. Wesley is flourishing at university thanks in large part to your guidance with his applications. Tyson is so proud, though, of course, he attributes Wesley's success entirely to his own genes and influence. The casual cruelty of her dismissal of my role in our son's life stung. Had she really thought so little of my contribution to Wesley's upbringing? The letter continued. I know we planned to start our life together once Wesley graduated, but Tyson's company is struggling with the economic downturn. He's working harder than ever, so worried about providing for our retirement. How could I leave him now when he needs support more than ever? Just a little more time, my love. Just a little longer. Always delays, always reasons to postpone the decision. And then 3 years ago, Hilda had been diagnosed with cancer. By then, it was too late for new beginnings, too late for the life with David she'd apparently been planning for years. I checked the timestamps on my phone. 6 hours had passed since I'd left David's house, 6 hours of immersing myself in the evidence of Hilda's betrayal. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the living room. Soon it would be dark, a fitting backdrop for what I knew must come next. With a deep breath, I picked up Hilda's final letter. My name on the envelope seemed to shimmer in the fading light. With careful movements, I broke the seal and unfolded the pages inside, bracing myself for whatever truths or justifications my dying wife had chosen as her last words to me. Tyson, my husband, the letter began. When you read these words, I will be gone, and you will have discovered the secret I've kept for most of our marriage. I won't ask for forgiveness. What I've done is unforgivable. But I do want to explain to help you understand how a woman who truly did love you could also love another man, could live such a divided life for so many years. I paused, steadying my breathing. Even now, from beyond the grave, Hilda was claiming she had loved me. After all the deception, all the betrayal, she still insisted on this point. I met David 3 years into our marriage, the letter continued. You were working such long hours trying to establish the construction business. I was lonely, Tyson. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. David was kind to me when I needed kindness, and what started as friendship became something more. The letter went on to describe their relationship, how it had grown over years of stolen moments and secret meetings. But then several paragraphs in Hilda had written something that made me stop breathing. I need you to know that Wesley is your son, Tyson. He is absolutely, completely, 100% your biological child. The timing of my relationship with David makes this impossible to doubt. I know there may be letters that suggest otherwise. David wanted so desperately to be a father, and I let him believe what he needed to believe. But you are Wesley's father in every way that matters, biological and otherwise. I read the paragraph 3 times before the words sank in. Wesley was my son, my biological son, everything I'd feared, everything I'd begun to believe, everything that had been tearing me apart since finding those letters. It was all based on David's wishful thinking and Hilda's guilt-driven complicity. The letter continued explaining how David had become involved in Wesley's life. David has been a good friend to our family, Tyson, and Wesley has benefited from having another man in his life who cares about him. But make no mistake, you are his father. You raised him, you shaped him, you loved him unconditionally. David may have given him money and advice, but you gave him everything else. I found myself nodding as I read, a strange sense of vindication washing over me. Whatever else had happened, whatever lies had been told, this fundamental truth remained unchanged. Wesley was my son, my flesh and blood, my legacy. Hilda's letter went on, addressing the question that had been burning inside me since discovering her affair. I know you must be wondering why I never ended things with David sooner. And the truth is that I tried many times over the years, but he was going through his own struggles, his wife's long illness, his loneliness after she died, and I felt responsible for his happiness. I know that's not fair to you, but I couldn't seem to break away completely until I got sick myself. There it was, the reason for the delays, the postponements. Not just concern for Wesley or for me, but Hilda's own inability to hurt someone she cared for. She had trapped herself in a web of competing loyalties and conflicting loves, unwilling or unable to choose definitively between the two men in her life. Near the end of the letter, Hilda had written words that broke my heart anew. I am dying, Tyson, and I need you to know that despite everything I've done wrong, you have been the love of my life. David was my escape, my secret garden. But you have been my home. You have been my safe harbor, my constant, my truest friend. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you can understand that loving him never meant I loved you less. Tears blurred my vision as I read these lines. Even now, even after learning of her decades-long deception, part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that in her own complicated way, Hilda had loved me, truly had valued our life together, even while seeking something different with David. The final paragraph was addressed not just to me, but to Wesley as well. Wesley doesn't know the truth about his paternity. He suspects David might be his father, and I've never corrected that assumption because I thought it might be easier for him to have David as a backup plan in case something happened to you. But Tyson, he is yours. He is your legacy, your blood, your son. Don't let my mistakes take that away from you. Don't let my selfishness destroy the relationship you've built with the boy who needs you more than he knows. I set the letter down, my mind spinning with all these revelations. Hilda had never planned to leave me, not really. Despite all her discussions with David, despite the promises implied in those other letters, she had chosen to remain my wife until the very end. Was that loyalty or cowardice, love or fear? Perhaps a mixture of all these things, as complex and contradictory as Hilda herself had been. A text alert broke my reverie. Wesley. Have you read it yet? Can we talk? I hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. What could I say to him now? How could I explain that his mother had deliberately let him believe another man might be his father, had used his paternity as a tool in her complicated balancing act between two lives? Before I could decide how to respond, the doorbell rang. Startled, I set down the phone and moved to the front door. Through the peephole, I saw David standing on my porch, his expression somber in the porch light. I opened the door, surprised to find him at my home. We'd parted only hours ago with no plans to meet again so soon. I read my letter, David said without preamble. I need to tell you something Hilda didn't include in yours. I stepped aside, allowing him into the house where he had never set foot during all the years he'd been involved with my wife. He entered cautiously, glancing around at the photos on the walls, the furniture. Hilda had selected the life she'd built with me that had remained separate from her life with him. I've read Hilda's letter, I told him, closing the door. She says Wesley is definitely my son. David nodded, his expression grave. She's right about that. Wesley is your biological son without question. But there's more to the story, Tyson, more that you need to know. He moved to the living room, stopping short when he saw the array of letters and photographs spread across the coffee table. Evidence of his relationship with my wife laid bare in my home. For a moment, he looked deeply uncomfortable, as if suddenly realizing the magnitude of their deception from my perspective. I made a terrible mistake, David said, his voice low with regret. When Wesley discovered Hilda and me together 5 years ago, he was so angry, so hurt. He lashed out at her, said terrible things, accused her of being a liar, a cheat, said he'd never forgive her. I could imagine the scene all too well. Wesley's explosive temper had been evident since his teenage years. His capacity for cruelty when hurt or angry was something I'd witnessed firsthand. David continued, each word seemingly painful to speak. Hilda was devastated by his reaction. She would have done anything to repair their relationship. So when Wesley asked if I might be his real father, asked it with such hope in his voice, as if it would explain everything, make the betrayal somehow less significant, she hesitated. And in that hesitation, he saw confirmation. A cold understanding began to dawn on me. Wesley had wanted David to be his father, had actively hoped for it as a way to justify his anger toward Hilda, toward me. And Hilda, desperate to maintain her relationship with her son, had allowed that misunderstanding to persist. She never actually lied to him, David clarified, as if that somehow lessened the deception. She just didn't correct him. And his voice faltered. I encouraged it. Let him believe what he wanted to believe. What I wanted to believe, if I'm honest. The idea of having a son, having some part of Hilda that would outlive us both, it was intoxicating. So you both allowed Wesley to think you were his father. Let him pull away from me, turn to you instead. The anger I thought I'd exhausted returned with fresh intensity. David couldn't meet my eyes. Yes, I've been giving him money, offering advice, treating him like my son. And in return, he's given me the experience of fatherhood I never had. It was selfish, Tyson. Deeply selfish of both of us. Does Wesley know the truth now? Has he read Hilda's letter to him? The questions came rapid fire, my mind racing to understand the full scope of the situation. David shook his head. Hilda didn't write him a separate letter. She included a message for him in yours, hoping you would share it when the time was right. And no, I haven't told him the truth yet. I wanted to speak with you first. I sank into my recliner, overwhelmed by this new layer of deception. Not only had Hilda maintained a double life throughout our marriage, but she and David had deliberately fostered Wesley's belief in false paternity, driving a wedge between my son and me in the process. He needs to know, I said, finally my decision crystallizing. Wesley deserves the truth, whatever pain it might cause in the short term. David nodded, relief evident in his expression. I agree. That's why I came. To tell you I'm ready to come clean with him, to admit my part in this deception. If you want to be there when I do. The offer hung in the air between us, an unexpected olive branch from the man who had shared my wife's heart and tried to claim my son as his own. In that moment, I saw David not as a rival or enemy, but as another man caught in Hilda's complex web of half-truths and emotional entanglements. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Wesley. Dad, please, I need to talk to you. I showed the message to David. It seems the decision might be made for us. Wesley's asking to talk. As if on cue, there was another ring of the doorbell. David and I exchanged glances, both recognizing that the moment of truth had arrived sooner than either of us had anticipated. Through the peephole, I saw Wesley standing on the porch, shoulders hunched against the evening chill, looking younger and more vulnerable than he had in years. I opened the door to my son, my biological son, the young man who had been caught in a web of adult deceptions and conflicting loyalties through no fault of his own. Behind me stood the man who had tried to claim him, who had contributed to the fracturing of our family bonds through his own desperate desire for fatherhood. Whatever came next, one thing was certain. The time for secrets and evasions was over. The truth, however painful, would finally be spoken aloud. Wesley stepped into the entryway, his eyes immediately locking on David standing behind me. His expression hardened, defensive walls snapping back into place. What's he doing here? I thought we were going to talk, just us. I closed the door, creating a barrier between our family drama and the quiet suburban street outside. We are going to talk, all three of us, because there are things you need to know, things that can't wait any longer. Wesley looked between us, suspicion evident in the tightness around his eyes. I knew that expression, the same one he'd worn as a teenager, caught in a lie, preparing his defenses before the accusation was even made. David cleared his throat. Wesley, I haven't been honest with you. Neither was your mother. His voice trembled, slightly, the confidence that had characterized him earlier, now faltering in the face of confession. You're not my biological son. You never were. Your father is standing right there, the man who raised you. Wesley's face went blank, a defensive mechanism I'd seen before when news was too painful to process immediately. He took a half step backward, as if the truth were a physical force pushing against him. That's not possible. Mom implied. You both led me to believe. I held up Hilda's letter, still clutched in my hand. I've just read your mother's final letter, Wesley. She confirms without any doubt that you are my biological son. She and David, they allowed you to believe otherwise because it seemed easier than telling you the truth. Wesley's eyes darted to the letter, then to David, seeking confirmation or contradiction. His world was visibly shifting beneath his feet, assumptions and beliefs crumbling in real time. But why would either of you? David moved forward, genuine remorse etching lines into his face. Because I wanted a child of my own so badly. Because your mother couldn't bear to lose you after you discovered our affair. Because it seemed to give you what you needed at the time, a reason to justify your anger. an explanation for the family dynamics you'd always sensed but never understood. The weight of these admissions filled the entryway, making the space feel smaller, more confined. I gestured toward the living room where the evidence of Hilda's double life still lay spread across the coffee table. Let's sit down. There's more you need to hear. Wesley followed mechanically, his movements stiff as if his body were operating on autopilot while his mind struggled to process this revelation. When he saw the photographs and letters displayed across the table, he stopped short, another layer of betrayal registering in his expression. You've been going through Mom's things. Her private correspondence, your mother's secrets have affected all our lives. Wesley, the time for privacy is past. My tone was firmer than intended, a protective edge creeping in despite my best efforts to remain calm. Wesley sank onto the couch, picking up one of the photographs Hilda and David at what appeared to be Wesley's high school graduation, smiling like proud parents. I remember this day. You couldn't come because of that big hospital project. His accusation hung in the air. The old wound reopened. I was there, Wesley. I came late, sat in the back. I saw you look for me in the crowd, then give up and focus on your mother, and I glanced at David. I thought he was just a family friend, someone your mother had invited to fill my empty seat. Wesley's head snapped up, surprise momentarily replacing anger. You were there, why didn't you say anything? What would have been the point? By then you'd made it clear my presence wasn't welcome. You'd stopped telling me about school events, sports games, award ceremonies. I had to hear about them from your mother, usually after the fact. The pain of those years resurfaced the gradual distancing that I'd attributed to normal teenage rebellion, but now recognized as something more deliberate, more orchestrated. David lowered himself into an armchair, completing our triangle of mutual hurt and recrimination. I encouraged that distance, Wesley. I'm not proud of it, but I saw your father's absence as an opportunity to step into his role. Every time he missed an event because of work, it made sure I was there, positioning myself as the more reliable father figure. The admission hung in the air, stunning in its calculated nature. Wesley stared at David, seeing him through new eyes, not as the biological father he'd imagined, but as a man who had deliberately wedged himself between a father and son. So everything was a lie. Every conversation we had about how I take after you, the talks about how I have your analytical mind, your artistic eye. Wesley's voice rose with each question, hurt transforming into anger. David flinched visibly. Not everything was a lie. I do care about you, Wesley. Genuinely care. That part was real, even if the biological connection wasn't. I watched my son struggle with this new reality, saw him mentally revisiting 5 years of interactions through a different lens. The scholarship money for grad school, the down payment for his first car, the career advice, all coming from a man who had no claim to him beyond a desire to play father to another man's child. And Mom, she just went along with this. Let me believe David might be my real father. Wesley turned to me, seeking confirmation or denial. I held up Hilda's letter again. According to this, she never explicitly confirmed it, but she didn't correct the assumption either. She thought having David as I paused, searching for Hilda's exact words, a backup plan in case something happened to me. She thought she was giving you options, security. Wesley's laugh was harsh, brittle with disillusionment. Secured by building a relationship on lies, some security. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his mother's, it made my chest ache. So where does this leave us, all of us? The question hung in the air, deceptively simple, yet impossible to answer cleanly. 3 men bound together by one woman's divided heart, forced to reconfigure our understanding of family and loyalty in her absence. David spoke first, his voice steadier now that the worst of the confession was behind him. I need to step back. That much is clear. I've inserted myself where I don't belong, created confusion where there should have been clarity. He turned to Wesley, meeting his eyes directly. I'm not your father, Wesley. I never was. But I would like to remain in your life if you'll allow it. As a friend, as someone who cares about you. Wesley didn't respond immediately, his expression guarded, calculating. And the money, the support, his practical nature, so like mine, asserted itself even in this emotional maelstrom. David didn't flinch from the blunt question. That stops now. It was wrong of me to use financial support as a way to secure a place in your life. If you and I are to have any relationship moving forward, it needs to be built on honesty, not obligation or dependency. I watched my son absorb this, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. Without David's financial support, he would need to make significant changes. The luxury apartment, the expensive girlfriend, the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to, all would need reassessment. Wesley turned to me, wariness still evident in his posture. And what about us? Where do we go from here? The question pierced straight to my heart, laying bare all the years of disconnection, the gradual erosion of our relationship that had culminated in Wesley selling his mother's purse without a second thought for my feelings. What remained between us? What foundation could we build upon? I think we start by acknowledging the truth, all of it, not just about your paternity, but about how we got here. I've been absent too often, too focused on providing financially rather than emotionally. You've pulled away, found another father figure, acted out in ways designed to hurt me. His flinch confirmed my assessment. And now we have a choice. We can let your mother's secrets continue to divide us, or we can try to build something new, something honest. Wesley's eyes dropped to the letters and photographs scattered across the table, physical evidence of the deception that had shaped our family. I sold her purse to hurt you. That part's true. The cruise with Melissa was just an excuse. He looked up, meeting my gaze with a directness I hadn't seen in years. I wanted you to feel lost, like I felt lost every time you missed something important, because work came first. The admission stung, but also cleared the air between us. At least now we were speaking truth to each other, however painful. David stood abruptly. I should go. This conversation needs to happen between you two. He moved toward the door, pausing only when Wesley spoke. Were you ever going to tell me the truth? If Dad hadn't found Mom's purse, would you have just kept pretending? David's shoulders slumped slightly. I don't know, Wesley. I'd like to think I would have found the courage eventually, but he shook his head. The truth is, it was comfortable for both of us, the fiction we were living. Comfortable for me to have the son I'd always wanted, comfortable for you to have a father who was present in ways Tyson wasn't. His honesty, while brutal, was refreshing after so many layers of deception. Wesley nodded once, accepting the answer without forgiveness or condemnation. I'll call you, eventually, when I've had time to process all this. It was as much of a concession as could be expected under the circumstances. David nodded, understanding the tenuous nature of the promise, then let himself out. The soft click of the door closing behind him felt significant, like the turning of a page in the complex story of our family. Wesley and I were left alone, surrounded by the physical evidence of his mother's divided life. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of all that had been revealed pressing down on us like a physical presence. I should have been there more. The admission came easier than expected, a truth I'd been carrying for years without fully acknowledging. I was so focused on building the business, on making sure you and your mother had financial security, that I missed what was happening right in front of me. Missed the way she was pulling away, the way you were growing distant. Wesley's expression softened slightly, a hairline crack in the armor he had built against me. It wasn't all your fault. I pushed you away too, especially after I found out about Mom and David. It was easier to blame you, to believe David was my real father, than to deal with how angry I was at Mom for lying all those years. This moment of mutual acknowledgement felt precious fragile, a small bridge forming across the chasm of hurt and misunderstanding that had separated us for too long. What happens now? Wesley looked around the living room at the house that had been his childhood home, now haunted by revelations of deception and divided loyalties. I considered the question carefully. Now we decide what kind of relationship we want to build, whether we can move past all this, or if there's too much damage to repair. Wesley picked up one of the photos, Hilda and David at their cabin retreat, studying it with new understanding. I have a lot of debt. His admission came suddenly, changing the subject with whiplash speed. Credit cards mostly, almost 30,000. Melissa? She likes expensive things, and I wanted to impress her. The vulnerability in this confession touched me more deeply than any apology could have. This was Wesley trusting me with his weakness, with his mistakes. The way he used to as a child before adolescence, and Hilda's secrets had driven a wedge between us. Is that why you sold your mother's purse? The real reason. Wesley's mouth twisted in a grimace. Partly, I needed money for the cruise. That wasn't a lie. Melissa's been talking about breaking up if I don't commit, soon take her somewhere special. I thought maybe on the trip I could. He trailed off, the foolishness of the plan, apparent even to him now. But mostly I just wanted to hurt you, to make you feel something, anything. You've been like a zombie since Mom died, just going through the motions. The assessment was brutally accurate. I had been numb, moving through grief in a mechanical fashion, never allowing myself to truly feel the depth of my loss, not just of Hilda, but of the life I thought we'd shared, the marriage I believed in. I'm selling the house. The decision crystallized as I spoke it aloud. Too many memories here. Too many ghosts. I need a fresh start. Wesley looked surprised, then thoughtful. The gravity of all that had happened seeming to finally settle on him. Where will you go? I've always wanted to live near the ocean. Your mother preferred the mountains, so we compromised with suburbia. My lips quirked in a sad smile at the memory. Maybe Florida. Get a small condo, walk on the beach, figure out who I am when I'm not defined by work or marriage. The plan formed as I articulated it, a vision of a different life, one where I could rediscover myself away from the shadows of deception and duty that had dominated for so long. Wesley nodded slowly. Sounds nice. His voice held a note of wistfulness, perhaps envisioning his own escape from the complications of our family drama and his financial troubles. You could come visit when you're ready, if you want to. The invitation felt monumental, an extended hand across the gulf between us. Wesley didn't commit, but he didn't refuse either. A small victory in itself. Instead, he asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him since David's departure. Are you going to share Mom's letter with me? What she wrote about me? I considered the request, weighing the pain the letter might cause against Wesley's right to hear his mother's final thoughts. Some parts of it, not all. Some things should remain private between husband and wife even after death. I held out the folded pages. You can read what she wrote about you, about your paternity. The rest, that's between your mother and me. Wesley accepted this compromise, taking the letter with careful hands. He read in silence, his expression shifting between hurt or anger, and finally a resigned understanding as he absorbed Hilda's confirmation of his parentage and her explanation for allowing him to believe otherwise. She really did think she was protecting me, giving me options. His voice held wonder tinged with bitterness. Even in her deception, she thought she was doing what was best for me. Hilda always believed she was acting out of love. For you, for me, even for David. My tone held no judgment, only a weary acceptance. She tied herself in knots, trying to keep everyone happy to avoid causing pain, and in the process created more hurt than simple honesty would have. Wesley refolded the letter, handing it back to me with unexpected gentleness. Are you going to forgive her? The question struck at the heart of my internal struggle since discovering Hilda's secrets. Could I forgive 30 years of deception? Could I reconcile the woman I thought I'd married with the one who had lived a divided life loving another man in parallel with me? I think forgiveness isn't something you decide once and it's done. It's a process, a daily choice. And it doesn't mean what happened was okay. It just means I'm not going to let it poison the rest of my life. My answer surprised even me with its clarity, a philosophy forming in real time as I articulated it. Wesley absorbed this, nodding slowly. And what about me? Can you forgive me for everything? The way I've acted, the things I've said, selling Mom's purse. I studied my son, my biological son, my only child, seeing in him both the boy he had been and the man he was struggling to become. I can, if you can try to become the kind of man who wouldn't do those things again. Not because I'm your father and I say so, but because you want to be better than that. The challenge hung between us, not an ultimatum, but an invitation to growth, to evolution. Wesley didn't answer immediately, perhaps recognizing the significance of the moment, the crossroads he faced. I should go. I need to think about all this. His voice was quiet, reflective, rather than defensive. Melissa is expecting me back at her place. He stood, gathering himself physically and emotionally. But I'll call you tomorrow. Maybe we can talk more. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it was an opening, a willingness to continue the conversation. More than I had dared hope for at the start of this tumultuous day. After Wesley left, I sat alone in the house that had contained my marriage, surrounded by the evidence of its complexity and contradiction. Hilda's purse sat on the coffee table, no longer just a memento of my late wife, but a physical representation of the secrets she had carried throughout our life together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of practical decisions and emotional reckonings. I put the house on the market, started the process of downsizing 35 years of accumulated possessions. Each item I sorted through carried memories, some now tainted by new knowledge, others still precious, despite everything. Wesley called the day after our confrontation as promised. Our conversation was tentative, careful, but represented a first step toward rebuilding. He had broken up with Melissa, he told me, had realized their relationship was built on superficial attractions and mutual neediness rather than genuine connection. It seemed the revelations about his mother's deceptions had prompted him to examine his own life choices with new clarity. David kept his distance, respecting the space we needed to reconfigure our family dynamics without his presence. He sent one email offering to help Wesley with his debt, not as an ongoing support, but as a one-time gesture to make amends for his part in our family's dysfunction. After some consideration, Wesley declined. He wanted to solve his financial problems himself, he told me. Wanted to stand on his own 2 feet without leaning on either of his father figures. The house sold quickly, a young family eager to create their own memories in its spacious rooms and established neighborhood. I found a small condo in a beachfront community in Florida just as I'd envisioned. Nothing fancy, but with a balcony overlooking the Gulf and walking distance to the shore. 3 months after discovering Hilda's secret life, I stood on that balcony watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and gold. The air tasted of salt and possibility, so different from the suburban environment where I'd spent the last 3 decades. My phone buzzed with a text from Wesley. "How's Florida place? Looks nice from the pictures." Our communication had been steadier in recent weeks. Not daily, not yet comfortable, but consistent. He had taken a second job to tackle his credit card debt, moved to a smaller apartment, was making tangible changes that reflected a new maturity. I texted back, "It's peaceful. You should visit when you can." His response came quickly. "Maybe next month if the invitation is still open." Progress. Small steps towards something new between us. I thought about Hilda often, but differently now. The initial shock and betrayal had mellowed into a more nuanced understanding. She had been neither the perfect wife I'd idealized, nor the heartless deceiver I'd briefly thought her after discovering her secrets. She was human, flawed, caught in a web partly of her own making, but also shaped by my absences, by David's persistence, by circumstances neither of us had managed well. Some nights I still felt anger toward her. Other days a surprising tenderness, remembering how she had nursed me through pneumonia one winter, or the way she'd supported my business dreams when everyone else thought I was being impractical. The complexity of loving someone for 35 years couldn't be erased by discovering their deceptions, no matter how profound. David had sent one handwritten letter arriving shortly after I'd moved to Florida. In it, he'd apologized again for his role in the triangle that had defined our lives for so long. "Hilda loved us both," he'd written. "Differently perhaps, but genuinely. I've come to believe that love isn't always the neat, exclusive package we're taught to expect. Sometimes it's messier, more complicated. That doesn't make it less real." I wasn't sure I agreed, but I appreciated his attempt at explanation, at finding meaning in the situation that had caused us all so much pain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I raised my beer bottle in a silent toast. To Hilda, to the woman I'd loved, and the woman I'd never really known. Then I made a second toast to myself, to the man I'd been, and to the man I was becoming. For the first time in my 64 years, I was living for myself alone, and it felt like freedom. Not a selfish freedom, not an abandonment of responsibility or connection, but the freedom to define myself outside the roles that had constrained me for so long. Provider of the betrayed, the deceived. The freedom to forgive without forgetting to love, without idealizing, to move forward without denying the past. The beach below was emptying as evening descended, just a few solitary figures walking along the shoreline. Tomorrow I would join them, would feel the sand between my toes and the Gulf breeze on my face. Would continue the process of building a new life, one uncluttered by secrets and divided loyalties. For now, I savored the quiet moment, the simple pleasure of existing without expectation or obligation. Hilda's final gift, perhaps unintended but precious. Nonetheless, the chance to rediscover myself in the aftermath of deception, to find authenticity after a lifetime of unknowing compromise. The purse, that burgundy leather purse that had started this journey of discovery, sat on my dresser inside. I'd kept it not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a complex memento of a complex woman and the life we'd shared. Its hidden compartment was empty now, the secrets it contained brought into the light, examined, and finally accepted as part of a larger truth. Truth doesn't always bring comfort, but it does bring clarity. And clarity, I was learning, could be its own kind of peace.